So the new MacBook Neo, the updated MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro with M5 chips just came out, and that made me finally make a video I've wanted to do for a very long time. You see, I've been using MacBooks professionally for over a decade now, and the question I want to answer today is, what is the cheapest way to own a MacBook? Now, if you've seen my videos on the cheapest way to own an iPhone or an Apple Watch, you know the approach. We look at cost of ownership. So that's basically buying price minus selling price divided by the years you own it, and that gives you then a real comparable cost per year. Now, in general, MacBooks hold their value pretty well. On average, a MacBook loses about 25% in the first year, and by year 5, roughly 70% is gone. But, and this is the key point of this whole video, not all MacBooks depreciate equally. The choices you make when buying can save you hundreds, sometimes even thousands of dollars. Let me show you how. It's actually pretty straightforward. You need to buy the base model if you can. And when I say base model, I don't just mean the cheapest MacBook available. You see, every MacBook, even a Pro with an M5 Max chip, has a base configuration with no user upgrades to RAM and storage. And the data here is quite clear. Base models depreciate significantly less than upgraded ones. A base Air loses roughly 25% in 1 year, a maxed out Air closer to 35 to 40%, and on the Pro side the gap is even wider. Mind that for the sake of simplicity I've been only looking at 14-inch MacBook Pros here, but of course this holds true with the 16-inch ones as well. Also, I want to say that the numbers here are not just ChatGPT estimates, but I actually looked at sites like Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, and my local willhaben.at, which is essentially the Austrian version of Craigslist. Now, obviously the numbers are still an estimate, but a pretty good one, I think. But why do base models perform so much better? First, Apple's upgrade pricing for RAM and storage is notoriously expensive. You pay a premium at purchase that you almost never recover at resale. Second, most used MacBook buyers are looking for the most affordable option anyway, so base models have a much larger pool of potential buyers. Like, there's a much bigger pool of people interested in the MacBook Air with 512 gigabytes of storage than 4 terabytes, right? And third, and that's where the value gets even better, base models are the configurations that actually go on sale. When Amazon or Best Buy or any other retailer runs a deal, it's almost always one of the base models. You rarely see discounts on custom configurations. So not only do you pay less, you can often pay significantly less if you time it right. Let me give you a real-world example here. Back in 2022, my girlfriend bought this MacBook Air here with the M2 chip. She upgraded the RAM from 8 to 16 gigabytes and the storage from 256 to 512 gigabytes. The total came to 1,700 euros. Now, at that exact same time, Amazon had a deal on a 14-inch MacBook Pro with the M1 Pro chip, my exact MacBook here, the base model with 16 gigs of RAM and 512 gigabytes of storage. Same price, 1,700 euros. But in the end, she really valued the form factor, the slimmer size. But yeah, that aside, for the same money, she got a MacBook Air with upgraded specs, while she could have had a MacBook Pro with a much better display, a more powerful processor, more powerful GPU, better video encoders, and better speakers. And if we were both to trade in our machines today, she'd get about 100 euros less than I would for the Pro. So what's the takeaway here? If, let's say, a base model MacBook Air is not enough for your needs, instead of upgrading RAM, storage, consider looking up at the base model MacBook Pro, as this is a much better value than an upgraded MacBook Air. Obviously, this is also true if a base MacBook Pro isn't enough for you. For example, let's say that you know that you need or want at least 2 terabytes of storage and at least 32 gigabytes of RAM, let's say. Now, when we configure an M5 Pro 14-inch MacBook Pro to these specs, we get to $3,000, albeit with 48 gigabytes of RAM, because there's just this jump between 24 and 48. But on the other hand, if we were to look up to the next higher base model, which would be the base M5 Max, this one comes as standard with 2 terabytes of storage and 36 gigabytes of RAM for $3,599. And, wait for a few weeks and you'll find this model already much closer to $3,000, and it will hold its value better and most likely cost you less over the course of a few years. And of course, you get the better performing Max chip in the process. But of course, it's also a different question whether you actually need all these high-end specs. And that brings me to my next point. Don't future-proof too much when buying a new MacBook. So when buying a new MacBook, many people try to future-proof their purchase. What does that mean? Well, for example, right now you're perfectly happy with 16 gigabytes of RAM, but you start thinking long-term. What if future demands are higher than today's? Maybe, thinking about running LLMs locally or about your future YouTube channel and whatnot. So you jump to 48 or 64 gigabytes and of course pay significantly more. The idea here is to avoid your new machine becoming too slow after too short of a period of time. Now, in theory, this sounds quite smart, right? And to some degree, it absolutely makes sense. But I think for most people, this is not nearly as necessary as it feels, and it's actually a huge cost factor. Here's why. First, computing hardware is already very mature. Demands don't increase by that much over a few years. And second, Apple Silicon in particular is so well optimized that even M1 MacBooks like this here still hold up wonderfully with today's workloads. I give you my own example here with my beloved 14-inch MacBook Pro M1. I bought this 5 years ago with 16 gigabytes of RAM, and at the time I thought, well, that might be not enough for the next few years, right? And I generally thought it was too little. And yet it still does everything perfectly fine, from having dozens of Safari tabs open while editing a video, to using Adobe Lightroom and Photoshop, and even running Claude Cowork. Of course, from time to time, the memory pressure turns yellow for longer periods of time, and yeah, 24 or 32 would probably be nice for the future. And if I'd buy a new MacBook today with 24 gigabytes, it's probably fine, maybe 32, but beyond that, that would be a little bit excessive for me. So the question I'd ask yourself is, what will concretely change in my needs or my workflow that warrants the higher spec? And whenever you don't have a very specific answer to that, I would choose your configuration based on the demands you have today. Because here's the thing, one of two scenarios will play out. Either you buy with just a little headroom above your current demands and current needs, and you're perfectly fine for 3, 4, 5 years. Great. Or there's a sudden technological shift or a major change in your use case, and in that scenario, you can sell your MacBook and switch to a more powerful, more fitting model, because you didn't overspec, it cost you less money up to that point, and your resale value is also better. Because here's the crucial part. If you had over future-proofed in the first place, chances are it still wouldn't have been enough, because radical changes by definition aren't covered by yesterday's top tech, top spec, right? So now you spend a lot more money and you still need to upgrade. A perfect example would be the 16-inch Intel MacBook Pro that was released just before Apple Silicon in 2019. You could have maxed out that thing, $5,000–6,000 easily, but the shift to Apple Silicon was so radical that 2 years later, a $2,000 M1 machine was much more powerful in nearly every way. And the resale value absolutely tanked, of course, and all that extra money you spent on that 16-inch is gone. And by the way, speaking of changes, it's widely rumored that in late 2026 or early 2027, Apple will finally introduce a completely redesigned MacBook Pro with an OLED display and possibly a touchscreen. So that's yet another reason not to overspend, overly future-proof yourself, because in the end, nobody knows the future. Instead, try to think of being agile and nimble with your MacBook purchase decisions. It saves money and gives you the flexibility to change course when you actually need to. Now, this could not only be buying the base model, but could also be buying used, which brings me to my smart buying and selling strategies. Because going back to those depreciation curves, in pure economic terms, the absolute cheapest way to own a MacBook is the same as with phones and cars. Buy a used model at the 3-year mark here, for example, and use it for 2 to 3 years, sell it and repeat. Now, when looking at the past 5 years for a base Air, that's roughly $115 per year. A base Pro, about $190. And By the way, there's no reason to be afraid of slightly older MacBooks. This one here, for example, has seen heavy daily professional use for 4.5 years now, and it's never skipped a beat. And before this, I had a 2013 MacBook Pro 15-inch that worked flawlessly for 7 years until I sold it, and it's probably still running fine somewhere, hopefully. And with Apple Silicon, that durability has only gotten better. M1 MacBook from 2020 is still an incredibly capable machine in 2026. But that's at the same time also a bit of a problem in trying to buy used, because these machines are so good that few people upgrade frequently, and the used market for M2, M3 or M4 MacBooks is actually quite limited and oftentimes a bit overpriced, at least here in Austria. So practically I'd recommend most people to buy close to new and own it for 4 to 5 years. That's what I do, at least. Now, close to new could mean waiting a few months after a new model launch and, until stock hits Amazon warehouse deals or resale deals, whatever they're called right now, or, scooping up a discounted previous generation model right after the new one is announced, like right now picking up an M4 MacBook Pro for a few hundreds off since the M5 just launched. Now, of course, if you can find the solid 3-year-old MacBook at around 50% of original retail, that's still the cheapest option probably, and you should go for that. Now, when it then finally comes to selling your MacBook, please do not just trade it into Apple. The trade-in values are consistently terrible. Apple would give me less than 300 euros, for example, for my 2021 M1 14-inch MacBook, and other buyback services here in Europe like Rebuy offer over 600, which is already much better. But selling privately through platforms like eBay or local marketplaces, my MacBook goes for 750 to 850 on Willhaben, for example, and that's more than double than what Apple would give me. This obviously isn't unique to MacBooks, it's true for almost anything you sell. The less convenient option almost always pays better, but with MacBooks specifically, the gap between trade-in and private sale is large enough that it's generally worth the extra effort. Alright, now to summarize the whole strategy. Step 1, figure out what performance you need today. And then add a little headroom above that, but don't overdo it. For example, if 16 gigs isn't limiting you right now, maybe go to 24, not 64. For storage, never upgrade the internal SSD. The price Apple charges is staggering. Right now, the jump from 1 to 4 terabytes costs 1,250 euros. Meanwhile, I have this OWC enclosure with a crucial T710 4 terabyte NVMe drive inside. Link is in the description below. And this combo is incredibly fast. In real-world use, it's nearly indistinguishable from the internal SSD speeds, and the whole thing costs about 500 euros. And that's less than half of what Apple charges for the same storage. And as a bonus, you can take it with you from your old to your new MacBook. All right, step 2. Look at used 2 to 3-year-old models first, and here it's the other way around. Higher spec MacBooks depreciating faster. Actually, that benefits you as a buyer here, but don't overpay. Aim for under 50% of original MSRP at the 3-year mark. If nothing fits, buy new as close to base model as possible, ideally shortly after new generation launches when discounts appear. And always consider going up to a higher tier base model instead of upgrading RAM and storage on a lower tier one. And finally, step number 3, if you can, sell privately and skip Apple's trade-in or whatever trade-in program. The 1 or 2 hours of more effort here can easily net you 200, 300, 400 bucks. Now, in the end, there's one more thing, pun intended. Apple just released the MacBook Neo at $599, and you could argue that this is the base model of MacBooks, and it offers genuinely amazing value. And if the performance fits your needs, I think it could be one of the best economic choices in Apple's entire lineup. The price is already so aggressive that Apple is likely making very little profit on it, which means that depreciation should be minimal. And yes, I'd still go for the base model, which is the 256 gigabyte version. All right, that's the strategy. Buy a base model, don't over future-proof, be smart about when and where you buy, and sell privately when you're done. In the description below, I've linked a few MacBook models that I think are great value right now. and should offer you a solid cost of ownership over the coming years. All right, thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this video helpful. If so, please consider leaving a like or subscribing, and yeah, have a great week. Cheers.